How's it going, Corey? It's great to get you back on the podcast. We we originally planned this thing for several months ago, but with the craziness of all the conferences at the end of the year and whatnot, it didn't work out. But I'm glad that I could finally get you on.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I think things got a little away from us at reInvent. It ended up. I mean, it's a crazy conference all in, but like we were overwhelmed the entire time there by attention. So just yeah, kind of whole week got away
That's
from us.
that's it's definitely a good thing, right? I mean, especially when you're coming out with a new product. I feel like the security field sees like 50 new products every year,
Yeah,
and it's like for a security professional that's in the field looking for, top tier products in each category for their company, it's sometimes hard to weed through all those weeds and find the hidden gem, I guess.
definitely. I mean, it definitely is. I mean, I feel like walking around reInvent, like the number of tools that like overlapped partially and overlapped with like other tools. It's like how many do I need? I feel like this is one of the painful things in like the security and ops space and DevOps space in general. It's like there's so many tools for things now. Like how do I glue them all together and like I don't know, get peace of mind.
Yeah, it's kind of frustrating, to be honest, because it's like these tools are kind of coming out of nowhere, and they're focusing on niches that might already be handled right by another solution. And yeah, they may do it a little bit better, but it's like, well, why do I have to add something to my security stack, right? Like, that's one more headache, that's one more tool that I have to manage, that's one more you know set of findings that I'm going to be reporting to my developers and engineers.
Yeah,
That like, you with how the cloud is going right now, it's almost like you need a development team that is only focused on findings, right, in your cloud. Because, I'm dealing with it right now, right? At my day job, I have probably 100 developers that I work with, spread out across, maybe 10 or 15 teams. And to get them to spend the time on, actively or proactively, right, resolving these findings and whatnot is insane. Like, it's so difficult to do that. Like, we have threatened people, we have provided, food to people and beer to people. Like, it's like, what do we need to do at this point? Because I'm used to my bribes working, but it seems like they're not.
yeah. I mean, I think it's just honestly, I think developers have. I think all of us, developers in particular, have just too much stuff to pay attention to, right? I mean, I think it's funny when you look at the cloud and like where it was in like 2005. So I've been in AWS since they first launched EC2, but like when we first moved to the cloud, like there was like those two services in AWS. It was like SQS and EC2, I think, right? I think they had their classic VPC, but like the cloud was simple. Like there was like, oh, I can run a workload and I can queue things. Like this is great. Maybe I had to put Postgres in an EC2 instance myself, but like right, there wasn't much there. But like where we've ended up is 200 AWS services. And then there's all the services in between that you don't care about that are important, KMS, IAM, like all this stuff, right? And so as a
Yeah.
developer, you might be writing a service in Go, but you might be consuming like 5 AWS services. I got SNS, I got SQS, I got SES, I got RDS, I got S3. Like I've got all these like cloud things that I'm starting to use. And like now you got bloat. I got Terraform, I got to figure out OPA. Like there's just so much tooling, I think, in the way of trying to build a feature to make the company money, right? And I think that we never, as an industry, like slowed down and dealt with that. Like we just did little tiny patches here and there. We're like, oh, the problem is like infrastructure is not declarative. Like everybody will just write Terraform. It's like, oh, okay. Like still developers spending a lot of time focusing on things besides building your product, right? And we never made the cloud easy again. Like it was easy and then it became capable. And now it's very capable, but very hard.
Yeah.
Like I
Yeah,
think I
that's a
think
good point.
yeah.
Oh, sorry, I
Sorry,
didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh no, so I was saying like I think like what the cloud needs to do, or teams internally need to be doing, is like figuring out how to like lower that surface area for people, right? Like we say cognitive load all the time, but like what does that mean? It's like less tools, but also like take some of the configuration options away. Like why do databases have the option to turn off encryption nowadays?
Yeah, right. Why
Why,
is that a thing? Like
why is it
no
why
one.
yeah, why is it a field for a developer to hover their mouse over and go, should I turn it on? Yes, you should turn it on. Should you turn it off should be the question. Like why is it even there?
Right.
Yeah. I don't know, this surface area of the cloud though, it's gotten too big, and I think it's hard to keep in people's heads.
Yeah, it's several years ago I took and passed the AWS security specialist certification, right? It's AWS's hardest security cert. You really have to know your stuff inside and out. And this past year, I had to retake it or re-up it, recertify it. And I did some very light study, very
Oh,
light. I figured, I've been in AWS, for 10 years, right? Like it shouldn't be that crazy, right? And I get into this exam and they're asking me about all of these, kind of minute one-off services that, it's like cloud formation, whatever it is, right? Cloud formation like build or whatever the new tool is. And I know what cloud formation is, but then these other like subcategories of it, well, I don't know. I guess I should have studied more. Um, but that just goes to show you how much is changing, and I think last year, what was it, like 25 new services were introduced into AWS, and that's just AWS.
mm,
I used to work for a company that was in AWS, Azure, and GCP, right? And I had to tell them like, hey, typically like this is managed by 3 different teams, right? And the reason is that it's 3 different languages, right? Azure doesn't have the vocabulary of EC2 in Azure. You need to know that that's a VM or whatever it is, right?
yeah.
Same thing in GCP. And I'm on a team of 2, including myself, right? And it's a mess, like how do you even like get started with that? How do you even wrap your hands around what's going on in the environment, where it's going on, what's talking to what, all that sort of stuff, right? And you know a- at the end of the day, now I'm interviewing 100 devs trying to find out how their app works to be to be like, oh, okay, this is the place that I need to look, or oh, this repository is actually important.
Yeah, dude. I feel like it's so funny. Like I feel like a lot of companies, the repository sprawl. The repository sprawl when you start doing things well is funny as well. Like this whole like, should things be monolithic repos or like repos for everything? It's like once you're at scale, like outside of Google, like Google does a lot to build the tooling to make like the Google monolith feel like a monolith, or feel not like a monolith. Sorry, but like for the rest of us, it's like, dude, there's so much stuff. It's like, where do you put your OPA rules? Is it with the application? Is it with the security team's repo? Is it with the compliance team's repo? Like,
Hmm,
what about Terraform? Like, who? Like,
hmm,
Terraform gets complicated. Like, there's some Terraform for the network, which we all share, and that's maybe owned by the networking team. There's some Terraform for a Kubernetes cluster, or maybe your team owns their Kubernetes clusters. Like, where do you start putting all this stuff? And like, how do you organize it and find it? Right. So like, I feel like that's so hard. And like coming on as a dev to a team that maybe is established and has like really good practices in place. I'm curious who you are, because the state of CD report, door report this year said that it's none of us.
yeah.
But, like you come in day one, you're like, okay, I want to deploy some new cloud resource. How do I do it here? Right. Like I feel like we've gotten to the point, at least with like things like Kubernetes, like you can have like if you go into a company that has Kubernetes, like it's like, oh, I know I can put my thing in a container and I can use I did this at the last job. My knowledge is portable on how to operate the thing. But when it gets to managing resources in the cloud, I feel like we're very bespoke still. Like you get to one company, they have a giant Terraform repo. You get to another company, they have 100 Terraform repos. You get to another company, everybody keeps their cloud resources alongside their applications. Like we do it so differently. And all of it seems a bit haphazard.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like now, I feel like changing companies previously was a whole lot easier than it is today. Because you can use, even if the company that you're jumping to is in the same cloud as your previous company, you can use these clouds in such, significantly different ways that it'll take you 2, 3 years just to figure out, what everything is and where everything is, what it all does.
Mhm.
It's not as cut and dry as it once was.
Yeah. Dude, in those lucid charts, they're all lies. Like you come in, you're like, oh, I found the directory of lucid charts. Awesome. I understand stuff now. And then like you go to troubleshoot something, somebody's like, oh, we haven't updated those in like 9 months. That's not what it
Yeah,
looks like here at all. Yeah. Yeah.
right. Y- Yeah, I can't even count the amount of times that I've had to, find what team owns what. And, you go to one place and they direct you to one resource, and you go to another person and they're like, oh, that's a terrible, roster. That's a terrible directory. Like, use this thing over here. And, you're getting directed all over the place just for simple information, because these configurations, the ownerships are changing so often. But Corey, we kind of just jumped into things without hearing your background, so why don't we dive into your background a little bit? Talk to us about how, you went down this path of getting into IT or getting into security. What made you want to go down it? Did you, look at it and have an interest in it? Did you look at it from a, what's going to future proof my career, so to speak, and dive into it from there? How did that look for you?
Yeah. Honestly, like a lot of things in my life, I've stumbled backwards into. So just stumbled straight back into it. So my original major was physics and architecture, and so I had happened to be working at a hospital at the time, and I wrote software for fun. Who doesn't write software for fun? Um, and I did data entry. And so my job was very, 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 very boring. And what I noticed was they're printing up these sheets every day. Everything was consistent. And then I would kind of type some data into this app. And so I wrote a tool that would take data. If somebody just brought it down to me on a diskette instead of printing it, and it would take it and it would put it into this like terminal system that we had. So I pretty much automated away my first job. And I just been writing software, for fun as a kid. And like that's the extent of my software knowledge at this point in time. And so the company I never signed a PIA form. Nobody owned the rights to my software. I wrote it at home. It was mine. Like I'd automated my job, and they wanted to buy it from me. So they offered me, I think it was $1,000 for the rights to my software and a promotion to the help desk team. And I was going to be making $9 an hour. And I was in college. I was like, dude, $1,000 and $9 an hour. Like, yeah, you can have my software. So like that's how I got into eventually operations. So I was working at this hospital, working on the help desk team, ended up on the networking team, started working in the data center. And at that point in time, was still a major in physics and architecture. And I switched my majors to healthcare information systems and started. It was right around the time like HIPAA was taking off, and so I was like, you know what? Like I'm already in hospitals. I've worked in 2 hospitals back to back. Really kind of enjoy working with computers, so I'm going to become a HIPAA security and compliance expert. And so that's kind of what I focused on. Now, what I didn't realize was those sweet budgets that I had my first few years. You don't get those sweet budgets every year. You don't just get piles of cash to buy new servers and buy Wi-Fi. Like Wi-Fi was rolling out at the time. I was like, oh, this is cool. I don't have to run Cat 5 anymore, or 4, whatever it even was at the time. And so after a few years of like building out a pretty awesome data center, a couple new hospitals and surgery centers, it got to the point where I was just in like maintenance mode, wrist slapping mode. You've violated a HIPAA thing. You're in trouble. And so I just kind of stumbled backwards into a job offer in Los Angeles, California, working for a startup. And so I came out here in early 2004, 2005. I'd been working in data centers. I get a job as a software engineer at this like digital signage company. So this is before iPhones. So like people are standing around in Starbucks with nothing to do besides wait. And so we put these big TVs in and we just blast you with ads and like sports scores and stuff. And so about a month or two into my job there, my boss walks in and he goes, you used to work in a data center, right? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, cool. He's like, AWS launched this cloud service thing. Our data center lease is expiring. We're going to move all of our stuff to the AWS or to Amazon. He called it Amazon Cloud. And I was just like, the bookstore? Like, what are you talking about? And the reason he picked me, of all people, is of the entire company, and there's like 40, 50 engineers, I was the only person that had experience writing software and working in a data center. Like, we had ops people and we had developers. And so, like, I was our first DevOps engineer. Like 2004, I just kind of got pigeonholed into this, and I've just kind of done it since. So founded a couple of startups back to back from there. Had worked kind of in e-commerce and affiliate world for quite a while. The Real Honest Company, a couple other products in there. And then about 2018 or so, I got into like large scale professional services. So like migrating multi-billion-dollar companies to the cloud. And what was really interesting was I started to see this like continuing trend. And that was when I was at startups, it felt like it was really hard to get operations and security folk. Find people that either had the experience and were developers, or just find people that I could attract to my startup, right? Like, I have a startup, I can pay you 90 grand a year. And somebody's like, I can go to Google and make $250,000 a year. It's like, okay, well, good luck, right? Like, nobody wanted to work for like one of these small companies. And then when I got to these big companies that were moving to the cloud, they had the same problem. I just assumed if you're, a multi-billion-dollar company, people are just throwing their resumes at you. But you're seeing these companies like post an ops role or a DevOps role, and the seats sit open for 2-3 months before they place the role, and turnovers on average every 18 months. So like, it's just like a rotating door, and you end up in this place where nobody really knows the state of the system. And so that's kind of where, I kind of got an idea that there might be a product in this space. And that's where I kind of originally got the idea from Asdriver, and then went out and did a ton of research, a ton of user interviews, and just found that like companies are struggling with this. Like, we don't have enough operations and security talent on the planet to support the workloads that we're slowly moving to the cloud. Right? We have 27 million software developers on this planet. By 2036, 1 in 100 US citizens will be a software developer. That's nuts. Like, there's gonna be more software developers. Yeah, we'll be the 8th highest growing, but this is Department of Bureau and Labor Statistics. We're the 8th highest growing industry of everything. We'll be outpacing waitresses, doctors, nurses, lawyers, but like, it's got a ton of software developers, but nobody's teaching people how to put stuff in the cloud. Like, we don't teach it in universities, we don't teach it in boot camps. It's on the job training or on the weekend training, right? And so, like, what do we do, right? We've ended up in a place where it's like less than 5 to 6% of developers have security and operations experience. Guess what? Like, all of our stuff requires to be operated somewhere in a data center in the cloud. And God, I hope it's all secure, but it's probably not. And so that's where we kind of started working on Asdriver. Like, the goal was really to make it where developers could really feel like they have the ability to manage what they need in the cloud, just get what they need. But at the end of the day, we're this abstraction layer that sits in front of AWS, GCP, Azure, etc. And what you're getting is this nice GUI interface that feels like you're diagramming. But as you diagram, it's actually pulling your Terraform modules, OPA. It's pulling all of your operations and security team stuff that they've put in place. So you don't have to think about ops tools as a dev. You think about what you want. You think about kind of the layout of it, save it. And now your ops team, they just write Terraform. They write Ansible. They write the tools that they know. And they've given you self-service. They've given you enough to move forward quickly. But you've got audit trails, metrics, costs all in one place where you as an ops person can understand what they're running. You can actually see their alerts and their change histories and all this stuff. Like, it gives you one place to go to troubleshoot, one place to go to manage your infrastructure, and neither team has to learn new tools. So we're trying to like help bridge that gap, like get more out of your operations team, scale those folks up. Yeah, and that's where we are today. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of that. About 9 folks today. Yeah, so that's my history in a nutshell.
Huh. You mentioned you were getting your degree in physics and architecture.
Yeah.
Right. So that's no small feat right there. When I was in college, right? So I had the great idea of trying to go pre-med right from the beginning, right?
Oh, yeah.
Some like astrophysics class, and it was just talking about, planets and calculating different things with planets and whatnot. And I got that. I understood that. I aced that class. That class was actually really easy for me. And it was like I think it was like physics 112 or something like that, you know, and then I was required to go down to like physics 105. That was like the lowest physics class that my university offered. And so I was like, well, surely if I did fine in physics 112, how hard can this class be? Right. And somehow I forgot that I'm not that great at word problems, and physics is nothing but word problems.
Mm-hmm.
Well, after trying the class twice, I failed it both times. I'm like, okay, maybe this whole pre-med thing isn't for me. And I, at the same time, while I was failing that, I had a friend that was also in architecture, and he also, you know, went down the same path of, you know, he would be good at times, but then the cost of materials to actually stay in the program and actually, you know, do the work and whatnot was like starting to outweigh the cost of the actual program, you
Yeah.
know, and so he switched and he went pre-med, and it worked out for him, of course. But you know, was there can you look back and identify different skills or things that you learned during that period that maybe helps you and benefits you now? Because, you know, those are very analytical or degrees. You know, you have to be able to tear apart a problem, you know, piece by piece, put it back together in reverse, you know, and figure out what's going on there. Do you think that those skills, you know, kind of help you today?
I think they do, and I would say that like you probably have a little bit of this yourself, right? Like I think a lot of software. This might be like weird to hear, but like we call it computer science. It is for some people. I'm sure you're people writing some C and building a database and thinking about algorithms. Like it's very computer sciencey to you. But for most of us, it is a word problem, right? Like we're tools. Like we're tools. Like software developers are tools. There's business people who have an idea of how to make money and they need to automate all this stuff, but they don't know how to do it. And like we're their interface to computers, right? Like we're right. Like they talk to us about what they need, and we have to take all that and interpret it and figure out how to make that software. Like that is the real job of a software engineer, in my opinion. I think that you know probably physics helped a bit with that. I think probably the skill that I think honestly, I think going to something like uh geez, I'm drawing a blank here on what it's called. Like philosophy and like the study of logic might even be
Mhm.
like really applicable there. But like I think the most I got from my physics program was good advice from the dean. And that was to leave the physics program. So I pretty much told him what I wanted to do with my life. I was like, look, I want to build something great. I want to build like something that I'm proud of. Like, I definitely want to be rich from it at some point in time. And he's like, you're realistically going to be a professor and make no money. And I was like, well, shit, I got to get out of here. Because I had these hopes and dreams. I'm like, oh, I'm going to build space habitats. Like, that's what I really wanted to do. Like, we didn't have SpaceX then. Like, we weren't going anywhere near the moon. But that's what I wanted to do, right? And then from my architecture, I think the thing that's really beneficial from architecture is just that extremely important physics and understanding like the load of buildings and like how much like different resources can hold, and being able to think through that, do the math on it is one thing, but being able to think through the nitty gritty details is another, right? So it's like you can put you can put like a big eye bar up, or maybe even some like LVL beams up to hold up a wall, right? But there's multiple things you have to think about, right? You have to think about holding up the wall, holding up the floor, and then you also have to think about like what is the person's experience in this building, right? Because holding up the wall isn't just the only goal of these wall, like of the wall. Sorry, holding up the roof isn't the only goal of these walls. It's also to like provide shelter, hang entertainment, give you a view outside the window. So like you have to think through things in multiple degrees pretty heavily, and every time you make a change to one of those, it changes the rest of it, right? Like, oh, we're going to make the wall taller or lower to be able to accommodate this other thing on this other floor. Well, that affects the people downstairs, right? So I think like just that like full circle of like always building, designing, and then assessing how it impacts everything else, I think is one of the things that made me probably a better engineer. But I can see where that surfaces in me in particular. I'm a full-on test-driven development engineer. I cannot to this day work on anything unless I have a set of like rigorous like tests in front of me that I can actually get that tight little feedback loop. And so that's what I'm looking for always in all my development is like, I have this theory. This is how the walls are going to stand up. This is what the experience is going to be like inside of this room. Build it. Oh, doesn't hold the load. Or, oh, can't look out the window. Iterate, iterate, iterate. So I think that's probably the most I got out of architecture. Physics was really just, I don't know, it's a bunch of hard math and like 1% of the people actually getting to a place where it's actually rewarding and everybody else is just professors. Sorry if there's any physics listeners, but you're probably a professor and not listening to this.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's just interesting, where our paths take us, right? And again, like in high school, I took physics. I took like AP physics in high school, right? Aced it. And this other person, sat right across the room from me. He really struggled with it. He got like a D, on a good day, right? We get to college and he's majoring in physics and he's like getting his PhD, like actually, doing real things, going and doing research in, some pretty awesome labs across the country. And we met up, years after high school. And I'm like, man, like, the difference that occurred right between us, like now I can't do physics to save my life, and now you're like getting your PhD, you're like doing research, you're changing the whole field in this area, and it's just interesting to see how that played out.
Was it the failure though that ignited? Like, is he a person that just chases like success, right? Because like I could see that it's like you do it, you're like, oh fuck, I suck at this, like how do I become better at it, like I just got to double down on it, like.
I think so, yeah. I think that was a part of it. Like it's interesting because I'm like that too with some areas, but when it came to like physics and chemistry, it was different for me because it was just like, man, I don't think that this is for me, right? Because even when I retook like chemistry, and I was actually doing really good in it the second time around. I was not excited to open the chemistry book and study. I was not excited to go to class and take this test. I mean, I guess you're never going to be excited to do that stuff, but it was like a real struggle for me, right? And so, like, I knew, like, okay, this probably isn't for me. I'm going to stop, like, trying to go against the grain here and figure something else out,
Yeah, it's funny, like architecture was like I saw them, how I got into it was I was just very good at math as a kid. And it's funny because I think my last math class that I took may have been in sophomore year of college. So I finished most of my math and physics for a 4-year degree while I was in high school. I was doing Calc 3 in like in 7th grade or something like that. So I was really good at math.
Jeez.
I'm still pretty good at it. I don't like it. I don't find it to be interesting. And maybe it's because I'm good at it. I'm just like, oh, this is boring to me. Like I would much rather like talk through problems and work through like the wordiness of it. But to me, like why I got into physics originally was this just seemed, oh, I'm good at this thing. Like I'll just go and do it. It's the easy path. And what I discovered, like when I was in school, is actually like architecture. I love architecture. I mean, I'm actually covered in architecture tattoos to date. Like, but I never majored in it. And so I've actually like seeked that in my life. So I've spent a lot of time doing volunteer archaeological digs. So it's like I want to go spend time in this temple here, like helping them work on it, just so I can be in like these old buildings that are built. And so I finally got to surface that like desire about 3 or 4 years ago. My wife and I bought a dump. And so we stripped it to the studs and did like a full like mid-century modern like rebuild of the house, and that was super fun. So it's like I think in retrospect, like leaving that industry, like I don't know if I would have loved it day in day out, but I did really enjoy doing my house. But I'm also kind of glad that it's done. And my dean of the architecture program also said that I would realistically be building strip malls and not space habitats, which he's probably correct.
Yeah, so I guess you probably found, like a passion for you to do something with it on the side and not have the pressure of a career, of having to do it every single day. You can kind of dabble and get your fix and then go from there.
Yeah. I can go inside whenever I want and do a little architecture and interior design.
Yeah.
The nice thing is I'm actually not a aesthetically skilled person whatsoever. So like I was never good at that part. I'm like I can do the math on like the load for this beam, but like every time I design something, it kind of looked like crap. The house looks good though. That's because my wife did that part.
Yeah. Well, that's what matters. Yeah, my we built our house, and my wife chose, 99% of the house, and everyone like always loves our house and whatnot. And they're like, "Oh, who chose this?" I'm like, "She chose everything." Like, I gave her the budget. I was like, "This is a hard budget. You stay within it no matter what." And she figured out the rest. Um, but it's just interesting, to me where like our paths take us. So when you were finishing up school, did you ever have that inkling that you would start a company and figure it out from there? I asked that because starting a company is not a small feat,
No.
especially to be successful, right? Like, I feel like personally, right, I'm not successful in starting a company. Like, I have a company, I have LLC, right, that I do all this side work through and everything like that. But I'm not like insanely successful with it, right? I don't even know that side of it. Like, I feel like I need someone to be like, no, this is where you click, Joe. Like,
Yeah.
this is what you do. Like, how did you build that desire to do that, and how did you reinforce it? Was there something that you learned or a place that you went to learn that skill set?
I think that the first time I did a startup was again like I've stumbled backwards and do a lot of stuff. And so the first time I did a startup, I was not looking to start a business. I was working at a company. They had layoffs. I wasn't laid off, but it pissed me off that they laid off all my friends. And so I was like, I'm gonna go find a new job. And I stumbled across a guy that had an idea for a business, and he's like, I'm looking for a co-founder. I'm like, I don't really know what that entails, but I can write software, so let's do it. And so that's how I got into my first startup, and I was just like, oh wow, this is crazy. Like, there's literally nothing here. I have to do everything. Like, I always joined a job where like stuff was already in play. Like I was joining a team or a project, and so that was rough. Like, went through fundraising, like went through all that stuff, and I think that what's interesting about it is, I don't know. I guess you got to say like I've had some success. Like, we've raised money, we have customers, like we built a product, we've done a lot of things. But like, I'm 3 years into this journey. It doesn't feel like success yet, right? Like, and that I think that's one of the things. It's like when you look at like the startup hustle and like just the LinkedIn shit and people post, like it seems like everybody's just like riding a rocket into success constantly. I think a lot of it is like A, it's just building your brand or whatever. But B, I think you have to like have that outward positivity, like, hey, look at this thing I did, because nobody else is there to celebrate your successes. It's just literally you just sit in your 10 by 10 square, like, oh my God, we got a customer today. Thank God. Right. And so you have to like project it like onto LinkedIn, like, look how good we're doing. So I think that everybody is like a lot more excited about like their successes than like they might actually feel like, because day in, day out as a founder, like it's a fucking roller coaster, man. Like, I had a real bummer call right before this. Like, I'm pulling a smile and like stoked because like I know I've got something really exciting like going on right now, and I've got a really cool call coming up next. But like every single day, it's like you sit down, you're like, this is the day, and like 20 minutes into, you're like, oh fuck. So like, I feel like really what it is like just as far as like starting a company, it's just like being able to like roll with the punches, like being able to just like blaze through something like just blaze through things. Like, I'm going to do this, like steadfast, like I'm going to approach this so bullheaded, but know when you have like gone too far, right? And like setting your experiments, like testing things, moving quickly, like kind of coming back to that architecture and that TDD loop. Like, that's the same way like we run the business. Like, let's try this idea, see if people like it. If so, like we'll invest some more time into it. If not, like shelve it and move on. And you have a lot more failures than you have successes. But when you have those successes, like how do you latch onto them and get as much out of it as possible? So I mean, it is very hard to start a company, and I feel like we lucked out. Like, we started ours like right on this like last wave of crazy Silicon Valley money. Like raising last year was hard. Like we did raise a good round, maybe if you're building an AI product today, maybe it's easy to raise, but everybody else that's not building an AI product, it's hard to raise right now. It's harder than it's probably been since the bubble first burst in the early 2000s. So yeah, it might appear like success, but like I'm going through the ups and downs every day, like everybody else is, whether it looks like that or not from the outside of looking at the LinkedIn.
Yeah, it's it's difficult for sure at times. Like I fairly recently opened up my podcast for sponsors, right? Because the goal is to build a sponsor base that, it essentially cuts out, a security stack. So if someone says, hey, I want to go, I need a SIM or I need X, right? Well, I listen to Security Unfiltered. What does Security Unfiltered recommend, right? And I mean, like you said, I'll get on these calls and it'll just be, back to back to back of just badgering, just me and everything else about it. It's just like, man, this is this is not going to work out. But something in me, just still believes it's going to work out, right? And it does, right? Like I have good days, I have bad days and whatnot. And I've encountered, people that I consider to be friends, actually doubted me when I was starting this thing. They kind of laughed at me for starting a podcast. Like, who would listen to this? Who do you know that would actually listen to you talk for an hour, Joe? I'm like, oh, that's a good point, because I don't want to listen to myself talk for an hour. So,
That's sad.
why would they?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting predicament, because you have to be able to say, well, screw your opinion. Like, I'm still going to make this thing work. I'm still going to do it. I'm still going to try. And I think, if I would have let them stop me right early on, and I never would have met all the people that I've met, I would have regretted it. Looking back, in my 60s or whatever, like I totally would have regretted it. But if I at least tried and failed, at least I could say like, hey, I gave it my all, and it still didn't work out. I went and did this other thing, but at least I tried,
Yeah. It's funny. One of my co-founders, I got two co-founders, our COO, Chief Operations Officer. The joke is he's an operations engineer, COO. Good. He thought the idea for Asdriver was so stupid when we pitched him on it originally. I've known him for years. He was my boss like 7 or 8 years ago, and then I poached him at a company we worked at, and then like that's where like the real like idea of Asdriver like kind of solidified. Like seeing like how much this big organization struggled with operations. Because when I showed it to him originally, he was like, "This is stupid. Like nobody's gonna buy this thing." You're an idiot. I mean, like we actually have an interview that's going up on our podcast where I grill him on like poo pooing us. But like it does suck. It's like, but now he owns a third of the business. Like, and he works on it day in day out. And he's like, oh, I see the value in it now. And it's just like, I don't know, people's. Especially in a startup, like people give you a lot of opinions. I got a lot of investors that give me a lot of different opinions. I got advisors that give me all like conflicting opinions. Like people have opinions and like, am I going to be good at a podcast or not? Like you won't know until you try, right? The real question, like, do you have like the gumption to go try? Like, do you have the desire to go try? And if you do, you should fucking go do it. And if you don't like it, stop. And if people don't like it, then probably also stop. But maybe not.
Yeah, I would much rather try and fail than not try at all.
Yeah.
Like that's, I don't know, when someone tells me that they think, my idea is stupid, or that, I shouldn't go down that route, or I couldn't, wouldn't, whatever it is. It's like, I don't know what it is. Something in my head, just, it's like a switch that flips. It's like, oh, okay, now I'm going to do this thing. Like you just told me I can't run a marathon. Okay, I'm going to go run a marathon.
Yeah.
All right. Like, you told me I can't do, this 50-mile race. All right, I'm going to go do it, which I don't know what it is. It's just I don't know. It's interesting, but not everyone has that, like even my brother, grew up in the same household, raised by the same two parents, he is not the same. He is like the opposite. He's go with the flow, type of thing, not going to go against the grain or anything like that. So it's just interesting to me, to see how people build that up, for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's
But
just you gotta just do it, and like if you're enjoying it, keep doing it. And like if you're seeing success, like focusing on those successes and try to reproduce it. Like not to be use VC speak, but like pattern match. Like okay, this works. Like this type of guest works on the podcast. Like keep doing it. Like I mean, if people like it, that's great. Like that's building a user base. It's funny we've been trying to like build our social presence, and it's funny because like trying to figure out like how to build social presence as a tech company is I think is also hard. There's some people that are very good at it. And like the super base team is great, right? But they post a lot of funny shit, right? Like it's not a lot of like deep like technical shit. And I try to be humorous, but like I'd rather tweet about technical stuff, right? So like we've been struggling to do this. We got like a few thousand followers on like Twitter and LinkedIn and stuff. And one of my VCs was like, because I have a celebrity dog. They're like, well, how did you build the following for the dog? Like, how did you like build up that? It's like, oh, we just post it every day. Just post every day. And eventually there was like 30,000 followers of the dog. Like people ask to take pictures with her like in public. It's super weird. People are like, is that Ziggy? And I'm like, the hell are you? Leave my dog alone. And they're like, why don't you just post every day? Like, why don't you just do it every day? Just do it every day and like build your following. But it's just like it's interesting. It's like it does feel so much harder sometimes to like get that that habit, like that you really because there's just so much shit to do, right? Like
yeah,
there's interviewing for this podcast, but then I'm sure you've got to edit, you've got to advertise, you got to source leads to be on it. Like there's a ton of stuff outside of like the part that people see, and I think like that's what it really comes down to is like when you're doing the part that people see, and there's like 90% of the stuff that people don't see, like are you getting enough joy from that like moment where like people are using the thing where it's like it's worth doing the rest of that stuff? And if so, then like keep investing in what you're doing and keep going for it, whether it's a startup or a podcast or whatever the case may be. But I think that's the hard part. I think that's where a lot of people give up is like, it was hard or it sucked or somebody told me it was dumb. Like it's like everybody has fucking opinions and most of them are bullshit. You just got to go with like what works for you.
right. So talk to me about what Asdriver is. We kind of touched on it before, but what's the problem in the industry that you guys are solving, and how are you solving it?
Yeah. So in our industry, like I'll come out first and say like there's a lot of buzzwords right now in the platform engineering space, and there's a lot of bullshit and non-bullshit materials out there. And I think that right now what's happening is like we've had this like decade or 15 years of like DevOps, right? And people rode the marketing back to DevOps into billion-dollar businesses. And I think people are starting to do that with platform engineering. And we're one of those people. But I think that what we're doing and like and the reason that we're doing what we're doing is much different than a lot of people in this space. So if we take a step back and like look at where we are, I can mention this earlier, like less than 5 to 6% of engineers have operations and security DevOps experience. It's like, how are we doing DevOps? Right? As like we see this all the time in our industry. It's like people say, hey, oh, you know what? It's a culture. Like you just got the culture wrong. It's like, okay. I mean, maybe it's that I've got one ops person and 300 software developers. Maybe that's the fucking problem. Maybe it's not culture. Maybe it's staffing. Maybe it's budget. That doesn't really fit in the culture. The culture is great, but like we don't have the resources, right? Even if we did, if I don't work at Fang, what's the chance that I get that ops engineer that I really want? The person that came through the interview pipeline where I'm like, that's the one. That one can also probably go get a job at Google making 3 times what I can pay, right? And so the reality is like some of the things that we depend on most, not the shit that we want. I want TikTok. I want Twitter. Like you don't need that. Those are the people, they have our attention. They have our money. They have the ability to hire the teammates that most companies need. But when you're at like the waste management company or at a healthcare company, like how do you attract great talent? You actually need good operations and compliance and security engineers, but they're all going to these cool dev tools instead. How do you get that talent? Pay bigger budgets, or you accept the candidate that's maybe not the best, and that's fine. Like, and now you got to train that person. Are they training on their spare time? Or you give them 20% of their week to do it? Like, where are we getting all this operations experience and security experience that we need to run all the companies that are moving to the cloud? We're not. Like a lot of people just go with it. Product manager doesn't give a shit if it's secure or not. Product manager doesn't care if it costs a bunch or not. They care that you click the button, the thing clicks fast, and it sells more shirts, right? CFO CFO cares about the costs, and you're going to hear about the cloud costs in about 3 months when like the quarterly reporting gets to them, right? And so like seeing like this is the state of the world, and people on this call or people that are listening to this are saying, not my company. You're lucky. I congratulate you. If you have 1 ops to 7 software developers, great. But the reality is, on the planet, there's 1 ops to maybe 22 software developers. So if you have that ratio, you've taken some of it away from another org who's suffering harder. And there's proof of this. You go look at the DORA report. We all love to read that. We're like, I saw the new DORA report. Everybody's doing better. Yeah, through page 3. When you get down to page 37, everything's fucked. 50% of people that respond to the DORA report, the people that are in tune with the DevOps report, say that an outage takes them multiple days to resolve, and they deploy software once a month. It's 50% of the people that respond to the DevOps report. So are we doing DevOps well? So this is what we're trying to solve. Like, we've been saying DevOps is a cultural problem for 15 years. And it is cultural at the end of the day, but there's so much other shit that we're missing that doesn't even give you the chance to solve this as a cultural problem within your org. And so what we want to do is help people move towards platform engineering, which is a subset of DevOps. Get developers to the point that they can self-serve. That's what developers need to do. They need the cloud to be easy. I need a Postgres database and I need a queue. What I don't need is ServiceNow and waiting on the ops guy 2 weeks to build me a Terraform module. I also don't have the time to learn Terraform. I don't have the time to learn OpenAI and check off, and I don't have the time to learn all the compliance docs that just came from our auditor. I don't have time for this shit because I got to build a product that makes the company money. Shift all that back to the ops person. We're not doing DevOps anymore. It's the ops person's problem, right? So it's like we're just shifting this stuff around, but we're not building more operations engineers. And so the way that our product works is there's 2 sides to it. If you're a developer, it's a no-code tool. Pretty cool. Come in there, you draw some infrastructure, you draw your applications, hit deploy, and it magically works. Now, that sounds terrifying to every operations person in here that there's a no-code tool. What it actually is behind the scenes is it's your Terraform, Ansible, Pulumi, Helm, whatever IAC tool that you're using. You just use that tool, you publish it into our registry, and your developers now have a central place where all of the IAC is. All their Terraform, Pulumi, whatever you're using is all in one place. And now I can, as I'm dragging and drawing stuff, it's actually pulling modules in. And as I'm connecting stuff together, it's doing things like, I see the applications connected to this Kubernetes cluster. It builds your CI/CD pipeline for deploying behind the scenes. So your developers aren't over to Git, doing a bunch of stuff in CI. They just literally say, this application runs on this Kubernetes cluster. I can have GitOps if I want. It's just one single entry in my CI/CD file, Asdriver deploy. And Asdriver builds essentially a virtual CI/CD pipeline behind the scenes. It goes, okay, I see you're deploying this app. Let me look at the entire dependency graph that you've drawn out here to figure out what to do with this. You want to go to this Kubernetes cluster? That's great. But I can also see you have a dependency on this Postgres. Let me go ahead and pull the secrets for that, inject it into your environment variables, bind your IAM policies in your role, schedule your workload. Your developer literally diagrammed their infrastructure, not a lucid chart, not a whiteboard. They got everything that your ops team wishes that they would go do, and your ops team only had to continue building IAC tools. I'm going to take OPA. I like it. I like Terraform. I'm going to build a really good Postgres that we're going to offer to our team. And you essentially get this like almost like an e-commerce platform for your developers. It's this thing. It's like I just grab stuff off the shelf. It's like, ooh, it's SOC 2 compliant. I'll take one of those Postgreses. And then it gives them just enough surface area to configure what they need. Gives you things like letting your operations team like give them recommendations of how to run a Terraform model. You don't have this in Terraform or rich validation, right? So I can say things like, hey, we do support Postgres. And if you're in AWS, it'll be RDS. And if you're in Azure, it'll be flexible server, whatever. But we also ship it with 3 configs. There's a development config, like if you got a preview environment, this is how we think you should run it. We have a config for the US and we have a config for the EU, right? And so now your developers drag the thing over and goes, hey, here's the 3 recommendations of how to run it. And you're like, I'm in the US. It's like, great, we just picked our production workload configuration for the US. And you're like, sweet. It's Postgres? And yes, that's all I give a shit about. Like, don't wake me up at 2 a.m. We go back to writing for software. So that's a very boiled down version of the way the platform works. A ton of functionality in there. But like what we really want to do is like most of the platform engineering space right now is focusing on DevX, and that's important. but like devs have it pretty good. Like when you look around the teams, the security team, the ops team, and the dev team, you're like, you guys got nap pods. Like I'm waking up at 2
Yeah.
a.m. to fix your code, right? And so I think a lot of our industry is focusing on how do we make the developer experience better. It's like we should be focusing on how do we scale this constrained ops team? How do we lower the surface area of the cloud so that people can reason about what it is, right? Like we're not focusing on that enough in the platform engineering or DevOps space. And that's what we're trying to do is say platform engineering should not be about making the things amazing for developers. Platform engineering should be about scaling operational efficiency and security inside your orgs without blowing your cloud bill up to $1 million a month.
Yeah, it sounds like it really simplifies everything. It takes, learning all these different architectures and workflows and everything, out of the mix. I remember a year or two ago, right? I had to start learning Kates because, we were going to deploy some app in the cloud on a Kates cluster. And here I am, like, getting a book on Kubernetes, trying to figure out, you know, like what the hell is what, just trying to go through it as quickly as I can. And I'm like, there has to be a better way to do this, like how difficult is this really to achieve? But that's a fascinating way of going about it. I never would have thought about, developing a solution that operates the way that you described. And I feel like, your architecture background kind of has a play into even, how you kind of design the solution, or at least from what you described, it sounds like it.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, like it's that, like I'm trying to think in 3 dimensions plus load at any point in time, right? Like, and I think that was one of the things that was key is like you see a lot of tools in this space, and I think, and just to be clear, like I don't want to shit on anybody else's tool. Like I'm friends with most of the CEOs and CTOs of my competitors. I think that the reality is any of us that are out here saying the tool that we're building works for everybody, everybody should buy it. It's nuts. It's fucking bonkers. Like if that was the case, everybody would be running on Heroku still, right? Like there's no one tool that's going to work for every org. The best you're going to do is the best one that works for your team, right? And but like kind of thinking about like what we're trying to solve, like thinking about like all 3 dimensions and load at the same time, like we have a problem in company after company. You talk to engineers, like, what is the problem? Like, people complain about DevOps, they complain about ops, they complain about wait times, bottlenecks. Even in the most perfect scenario, an operations team that's doing amazing, there's still a bottleneck, right? I can't predict the future. I don't know what project you're working on and what you're going to come to me with. So when you come to me with it, you have to wait 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 2 days, 3 weeks, whatever, right? And so I think one of the things that was really key was like, we're approaching this not saying we're going to focus on DevX and operations is going to go away. We're coming to this saying, how do we get you what you need without making anybody have to deal with learning a new tool set? Because we don't have time. We don't have time to learn another tool. And so we've spent a lot of effort, like kind of bending over backwards. And originally the platform was very much like, hey, developers, like there's some dumbed down thing that you can do and you don't have to write Terraform. But like it was still like too much. And so like the original version of Asdriver did not have a UI. It was just this concept that we call the bundle that we're actually open sourcing, but it wasn't a UI yet. And we kind of like realized one day we're drawing some stuff on the whiteboard. We got these bundles. We're like, okay, so like this is how they all connect together, and we're just like, these are all just types and structs of data. Like like we can program this. Like why are we making people like cobble together like a little like pseudo Terraform CI pipeline to get this power instead of just saying like just draw it. Like you want to draw it. You drew it on a whiteboard, you typed it, and then you went to fucking Lucid Charts and you drew it again, and nobody updated it in 6 months. Like let's just let people be the drawing, be the source of truth. So that's kind of how we like came to that. Definitely wasn't like it's iterations. Like Asdriver's been through like a ton of development over the years. Like there's a lot of stuff to the platform, but like V1 didn't have a user interface like at all. It was very much like a CI oriented tool, and just trying to get that like CI pain away from developers was kind of it. Like, people are afraid of changing their CI pipelines. They don't have great ways to test them, right? You merge it and you're like, fuck, it worked. worked, right? Like what's in that CI pipeline? Maybe it's tests, maybe it's provisioning, maybe it's secrets management. Like who knows what is in a Jenkins pipeline? It is a wild, wild place, right? And so making sure that developers didn't have to think about changing that because that was what they were afraid of is kind of what like gave us this idea of like going towards this visual like generative DAG under the hood.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Well, Corey, unfortunately, we're at the end of our time here.
Yeah.
Before I let you go, why don't you tell my audience, where they can find you, where they can find your company if they wanted to learn more. I definitely really enjoyed our conversation, so I definitely want to have you back on.
Yeah, so I'm Corey O'Daniel everywhere, Cory O'Daniel. There's two of me, though. So if you find the one that's really jacked and plays football, that's not me. I'm the software developer one. Yeah, I'm Corey O'Daniel on LinkedIn, on GitHub, Twitter. Massdriver's company name, massdriver.cloud. Yeah, and check it out. Give me your feedback. Would love to hear. Would love to hear from your community.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode.